You're drowning in yeses that are killing your paycheck and your peace because you're confusing fear with kindness. While you burn out trying to be liked, top performers are rejecting 90% of demands and getting richer. This one brutal story reveals exactly how a chronic people pleaser flipped the script, reclaimed her boundaries, and tripled her income by finally saying one word: no. Let me tell you about Sarah. She was 32, working 60-hour weeks at a marketing agency, making $52,000 a year, and she said yes to everything. She said yes to the 2 a.m. emails. She said yes to covering for lazy coworkers. She said yes to clients who demanded 5 revisions for free. Sarah believed this made her valuable. She believed this made her kind. But her body had a different opinion. One Tuesday morning, Sarah woke up in an ambulance. Her heart had been racing for 3 hours straight. Her left arm had gone numb, and her colleague had called 911 because Sarah collapsed in the break room. The doctors ran every test imaginable. They checked her heart, her brain, her blood. But the cardiologist sat on the edge of her bed and gave her a diagnosis that had nothing to do with her organs. He said, "Your body is breaking because you won't tell anyone no." Sarah laughed at him. It sounded like a joke. But the doctor wasn't smiling. He handed her a business card for a therapist and said, "You don't have a heart problem. You have a boundary problem." Therefore, Sarah did what every high achiever does. She tried to fix it herself. She bought 3 books on assertiveness. She watched 12 YouTube videos about confidence. She even practiced saying no in the mirror, staring at her own reflection and whispering the word until it felt less foreign. But the next morning, her boss asked her to take on another account, and Sarah felt that familiar terror rising in her throat. It wasn't a fear of the work. It was a fear of being disliked. It was a fear of being abandoned. So she said yes again, which meant she was back to square one, except now she was also carrying the shame of knowing better. This is where most stories end. But Sarah's was about to take a turn that would change everything. A week later, Sarah found herself in a coffee shop with her mentor, a woman named Elena, who ran her own consulting firm and worked roughly 20 hours a week while making 4 times Sarah's salary. Sarah expected sympathy. She expected gentle advice about work-life balance. But Elena leaned across the table and said something brutal. She said, "You're not nice, Sarah. You're just terrified, and your fear is wearing a mask of kindness so you don't have to face how little you value your own time." Sarah felt like she'd been slapped. She started to defend herself. She started to explain about being a team player. But Elena cut her off. She asked, "Do you know why I make $300,000 a year while you make 50?" Sarah shook her head. Elena said, "Because I say no to 90% of what crosses my desk. I say no to discounts. I say no to scope creep. I say no to meetings that should be emails. And I definitely say no to anyone who tries to make me feel guilty for having boundaries." Sarah stared at her. This went against every lesson she'd ever learned about hard work and humility. But Elena wasn't finished. She pulled out her phone and showed Sarah her calendar. It was terrifyingly empty. There were huge white spaces where other people packed their schedules with busyness. Sarah realized in that moment that she'd been treating her time like it was infinite and worthless. Therefore, Sarah made a decision that terrified her. She would conduct an experiment for 30 days. She would say no to 90% of requests, just like Elena. Not just at work, everywhere. Her neighbor asked her to dog sit. She said no. Her friend asked her to help move on Saturday. She said no. A nonprofit asked her to join their board. She said no. But here is where the story gets interesting. Sarah expected punishment. She expected exile. She expected everyone to hate her. But something else happened entirely. Her boss, instead of firing her, started treating her differently. He stopped piling the grunt work on her desk because he knew she would refuse it. He started saving her for high-value projects only. Her coworkers stopped asking her to cover their shifts because they knew the answer, which meant Sarah finally had time to do the deep strategic work that actually mattered. Within 3 months, her client retention rates had doubled because she was giving her full attention instead of her exhausted leftovers. But the real shock came when she looked at her bank account. Sarah had assumed that saying no would cost her money. She assumed that less work meant less income. But the opposite was true. Because she wasn't constantly buried in low-value tasks, she had bandwidth to spot a major efficiency gap in her company's workflow. She proposed a new system to leadership. They implemented it. It saved the company $200,000 in the first quarter. Therefore, they promoted her. Her salary didn't just go up. It tripled. She went from $52,000 to $160,000 in 18 months. But here is the psychological twist that nobody talks about. Sarah wasn't just earning more money. She was spending less of it. When you say yes to everything at work, you compensate for the misery by saying yes to everything outside of it. You buy the expensive dinners because you feel empty. You book the vacations you don't enjoy because you need to escape. You purchase the clothes you don't wear because you hope they'll make you feel powerful. But when Sarah started saying no at work, she stopped needing to buy her happiness back. Her anxiety medication went in the trash. Her Sunday night dread evaporated. She started sleeping through the night without waking up in a panic about her inbox. You might think this story is about confidence, but it isn't. It's about arithmetic. Every time you say yes to something, you are saying no to something else. When you say yes to that low-paying client who demands the world, you are saying no to the high-paying client who respects boundaries. When you say yes to the committee